Wake up, something isn't right. Everybody sleepwalks through another night. Laugh tracks in the distance, sirens in our heads. Everybody says you're crazy when you don't believe what's fed. This is the Psych Ward. This is the show. Everybody trapped here, nobody knows. This is the Psych Ward. Open up your eyes. Everything around you should have made you realize. Should have made you realize.
Welcome to the Psych Ward. Welcome back to all my psychos out there. Hello, how's it going? All right. So here's the deal, right? I went and I was having some conversations with people this past week, and I realized a lot of things that I'm just going to share with you right now. Let's get right into it. Just the premise, if you guys remember from episode 1, right? The premise is that we are in an open air psych ward. All of us, that's where we're at. That's where we're at. We were born into this psych ward. Can you imagine, you know, people having babies in a psych ward? They don't know they're in a psych ward, the babies anyway. And so they're surrounded by all these crazy people, and they just learn the crazy behaviors as normal. This is normal. Now, they might think this is like, you know, it doesn't feel good, but it's normalized. And so they just continue on going along with it, right? That's what we're in right now. We're in an open air psych ward. And the only way to get out is to basically prove you're not a psycho by not doing the psycho things, right? But also, because it's an open air psych ward, there's no actual way to get out unless we support everyone who's a part of the psych ward, a part of the insane asylum, if you will, to stop being insane, to stop being psycho, right? I was looking at a few points. Like I said, I was talking with a few people this past week, and I came across some interesting things that I wanted to share with you. And somebody, a friend of mine, he has another stream. He said something the other day that was kind of funny. But it was really, it hit the point right on the nose. And I'm going to share that with you right now. The question is, would you knowingly fund your own enslavement, right? And he was saying this because I don't know if you know who Larry Fink is. Let me just see if I can look him up real quick. Larry Fink, right? Larry Fink. I don't know why I put a G in there. Larry Fink. What did he say specifically? There was something that he said that was maybe it's. Let me just say data centers. Let's go to that one. He says, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink proposed using Americans' pension savings to build data centers and AI infrastructure. In his view, that would give the industry trillions of dollars and allow more Americans to profit from AI growth. Okay, if you don't know what's going on with AI data centers, let me tell you just a little bit, okay? The AI data centers, I was just listening to a conversation. I don't remember the guy's name, actually. I don't remember even the interviewer's name. I've never seen this podcast before that I was watching, but they were talking about AI safety, and the person that was being interviewed was basically saying there's no reason to create an artificial general intelligence because there's no way that we can ensure that this artificial general intelligence is actually going to act in the best interests of humanity. And he was giving some examples, and some of the examples that he gave where, hey, if you have an artificial intelligence and you tell it you're supposed to tell me all the letters within a word, he says, no matter what the rule is that you give it, it will always at some point break down and not follow that rule. Okay. And so he says there's really, like, if you created, instead of creating a general intelligence, if you created a super intelligence in a specific field, but just in that field, and you didn't give it access to other things, it would be just as useful as this idea that they're coming up with to create a general intelligence. A general intelligence, just for those of you listening who may not be aware, in the terms that he's using it, he was saying a general intelligence, you can ask it to find a cure for cancer, but you can also ask it to invest and make as much money for you as possible. And those two things, just in general, just those two things may be at odds with each other. They may not have the same goal in mind, actually, because, maybe you're trying to find a cure and also you're trying to make as much money as possible. Maybe the making as much money as possible is not conducive to finding a cure, because to make as much money as possible, you're not selling the cure, you're selling perhaps things that solve the symptoms, and that makes you as much money. But if you solve the cure, or if you have the cure rather, then you won't be able to use that opportunity to make as much money, and other things are not as profitable. So that's just kind of like an idea there, right? And so he was just basically saying that, just in a nutshell. I'm really distilling down like 2 hours worth of conversation to, hey, this is not really a good idea, because it's actually going to hurt society more than than any benefit that we could see. And you could get the benefits that you're thinking you want from this general intelligence thing if you instead silo the artificial intelligence to just one specific topic, right? And then you have a different artificial intelligence for another specific topic, and you don't combine the two. Okay. Anyway, where was I going with this? Because what we're hearing more and more and more is that we have to build artificial intelligence. We don't have a choice. We have to build it. You may have seen data centers are being built all over the US, especially, but in other countries too. But we're slated to build 3,000 to 4,000 data centers within the next 4 years or something crazy like that, right? And you may have seen how big some of these data centers are. Kevin O'Leary is a part of one that's being built in Utah. There's, Larry Fink is obviously building data centers as well. Elon Musk has data centers. There's data centers all over. And they are very resource intensive, meaning they use a lot of electricity and a lot of water. And if you're not aware, you should definitely look into some of this stuff. I didn't mean to really go into this topic today. I was just proposing this. I was just bringing this up because this is what my friend Cameron had said just the other day. He's like, would you knowingly enslave or fund your own enslavement? And he was bringing up how Larry Fink was saying, hey, you know what? You don't actually have a choice. I wonder if they have the exact quote from him here. Let me see. AI is not optional. Leadership in AI is not optional. Okay, so this is the common thing that the common theme that we see with all these AI people, all these tech people, is they're saying that leadership in AI is not optional for the United States, right? And will require sustained investment in research, infrastructure, and talent. Capital markets capable of financing innovation at this scale are essential. All right, and then there was another. Nope, that's all they have for this one. Okay, there was another quote, and I don't have it here, but there was another quote of him saying basically that you will be forced to invest in AI. That we're getting the money from pensions, savings, and you don't have a choice in that matter. So if you've got your money, because what is BlackRock? What is Larry Fink the head of, or the founder of? Well, BlackRock. BlackRock is a hedge fund, right? And so they manage your money purportedly to make you more money, right? But what he's saying here is that we're going to invest in AI. Yes, it's going to make you a lot of money, but I get to choose what I do with your money. So if I make you more money, it doesn't matter what I invest your money in. Think about that. He could be using the money to create bombs to drop on innocent people, and really causing havoc in the world, but it makes you more money. And so, hey, I'm doing my job. I'm doing my fiduciary duty. You can't really complain. You gave me the money and you said whatever you got to do to make more of it, and that's what I got to do. Well, this is what he's doing. He's making data centers, and where I was trying to go with this, and trying to make it as quick as possible, is the data centers. If you should really look into them, because you're seeing in a lot of small towns, like in Ohio and other states, in Texas, just all around the U.S., people are up in arms. They are upset. Here in Florida, even people are upset because. Number one, they don't tell you who's behind the data center before they start building, okay? Whoever's behind the data center is clearly buying off the city council and, slipping them some, money. I don't know exactly what it is, but it seems pretty clear that the people who are in the position to approve the data centers are being incentivized to do so, because generally speaking, the entire town doesn't want it. Or there's a lot of people from the town that show up when they never show up to the city council meetings or whatever, the town hall meeting, whatever it is. Hundreds of people will pour in and say, we don't want this. Please don't do this. And they voted in anyway. They say, well, it's approved. Yeah, not enough people came in to tell us that they didn't want it, and not just not enough people. You didn't come on time, even though it was never published or never mentioned beforehand that you could say anything about this, that these deals were already in the works. And so by the time the citizens know about it, it's already too late. We already made the decision, and we're just letting you know so that you can air out your complaints, but we really don't care about your complaints. And the effect that it's having on these citizens, on these small towns, is that people are now complaining, hey, I don't have clean drinking water anymore because this thing is using up all the water from our wells that we're all connected to. When you drill a well, it's not just your well, or rather, it's not just your water. That water is like, if you can imagine a lake that is huge and underground. It's an underground lake that's huge. And, there may be, when you drill your well, your neighbor a mile down also drills his well. And there may be hundreds of people all connected to this same body of water underground. I'm oversimplifying it, but that's the general gist. And then you get this AI data center that comes in, and you've got, you're taking out maybe, let's say, let's throw a high number up there. And let's say you're using 100 gallons a day. 100 gallons a day. I think that's a lot, right? But let's say that's how much you're using for your family, right? At your house, and watering your plants and all this stuff, right? Taking showers, drinking water, all of it. Okay. But then you got this AI data center. How much? Let's find out. How much does an AI data center, how much water does an AI data center use? Millions of gallons of water daily. There you go. So okay, I thought 100 gallons a day would be a lot for, a single family, but I'm trying to overestimate it, right? Millions of gallons. So then you have your one neighbor over there that's basically emptying the entire lake, right? And then you got people saying, oh, well, my energy bill has not just gone up, a little bit. My energy bill now costs more than my mortgage. My energy bill is hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars per month, and I haven't changed my energy usage, but they're saying, oh, I'm using it when it's at a, what do they call it? At peak usage, right? I'm using it during peak hours. Well, all hours are peak hours now because the data center is using so much energy that it's more than our entire town combined. And so, hold on, wait a minute. Me, a living person who's been living here for 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is, I cannot drink clean drinking water the way that I have been able to. I cannot use energy the way that I have been able to. Now I'm forced out of here, out of a home that I own, because the resources that are needed in order to live are no longer available to me. And they're going to some AI data center, which we apparently say we have to build thousands of them, and we have to just keep going so we can build this AI and make it super intelligent. And what is all that being used for? Well, it's used to collect a lot of data. It's in the name, data center, right? It's used to collect and process a lot of data for an AI, not just so it can create, people have this idea that, the AI data centers are just used to create like funny images for you or fun songs. The intro song to this show is made by AI, right? But the amount of data that it actually takes to do that is very minuscule compared to how much data centers they're creating and what they're actually trying to implement that for. It's not just to create a show just for you. The data centers that they're building, the whole purpose behind them is so that they can create an infrastructure where they can collect information on literally, or data on literally every single thing going on here on Earth. So where you go in the morning, not just where you go in the morning, what time you wake up, what time you go to sleep, what you're doing in that in-between time. That if you look up, Wi-Fi signals can be used to map where you are in a particular building, right? So where you're sitting in your own home, the position that you're sitting in, and then they can use that information, the position that you're in, they can use that information to identify who you are. Maybe because you have a phone in your pocket and they're bouncing information off of that phone and they recognize, oh, okay, this address belongs to this person. Okay, now we know who's in this house. We know who's in this building. We know who you go to visit. But not only that, it's also when they look at, if you don't have your phone on you, they can determine who you are based on the way that you walk. The way that you walk. So now they've got this information on how tall you are, the way that you walk, and they say, oh, that's Drake, that's my buddy over there, that's John, that's so-and-so, that's Sally over there. Yep, she walks with a limp. They know that just based on the Wi-Fi signals that they're sending out, the CCTV cameras that are all over, and they're building more. You've heard of Flock, or if you haven't heard of Flock, well, think about this. If you were running a psych ward and you had a lot of, I don't know what you call them, patients, I guess, in the psych ward, and you wanted to be able to stay away from certain patients because they're just really crazy and you don't want them anywhere near you. And in fact, you know that you've taken a lot of resources from some of the other patients. You took their blankets, so now they don't have those anymore, and they're looking for their blankets. But you wanted to build a really nice blanket fort, And so because you wanted to build this really nice blanket fort, then you had to use everybody else's blankets. So now they're cold in the psych ward, and they're looking for you so they could find their blankets again. And so you've set up, wouldn't it make sense that you would set up all these cameras everywhere so that you could see, oh, there goes Sally. She's looking for that blanket. She told me if she ever saw me, she'd hit me upside the head with a frying pan. I need to make sure I avoid Sally at all costs. Or maybe you know something now about Sally so that when she comes looking for her blanket, you can say, Sally, I saw you over there talking with Johnny, and I know that you're actually not supposed to be talking to Johnny because you're friends with Brad. And Brad would be so upset if he heard or knew that you were talking to Johnny, and I'll let that cat out of the bag. So what's it going to be? Are you going to really come after me with a frying pan? Or am I going to have to let Brad know that that you're over there talking to Johnny? Oh, you don't want that information to go out. Okay, well, run along now. I'm keeping your blanket, right? That is a really simplified version of how our world is being run right now, right? And unless we are able to support every single person to really understand this reality and stop being insane, because when you can actually understand reality, then you can actually not be insane, and you can go, actually, yeah, that would make sense. That would make sense for me to not be insane. Then fantastic. We could live in a paradise. Because look around, look outside. It is beautiful. I live in beautiful sunny Florida. It's green outside. It's not rained as much as we would like, and it's still beautiful and green, right? If there were not crazy people in this world, this would be paradise, and it could be, but we have to support ourselves to not be crazy. And by crazy, what do I mean? Because I don't just mean like insane in the comical sense or in the extreme sense, but I mean like we live in a system where the number one focus of everyone is money, and money at all costs, right? And so much so to the point where we're building AI data centers based on the fact that it's going to make some people more money. Not everyone. Not everyone's going to live well off of this. Some people are going to make more money, but for the vast majority of people, their livelihood is going to be worse. They have less drinking water, less clean water, and in fact, less clean water for our environment, because the way that works is the water goes into the system, and then what comes out is some sludge, some contaminated water, right? So anyway, let me get into what I actually wanted to get into, which is, would you knowingly fund your own enslavement? So Larry Fink over here, he's saying, listen, I have a way that we can basically lock everybody down, gather as much information on people as possible, and we'll use their own money to do it. How cool is that? That's what he thinks. So if your money is in a 401k, in a retirement plan, in some sort of, hedge fund, any of that, pension, that's actually what it's being used for. And all you might see is the number goes up, and you might be happy about that. And perhaps you might die before this total enslavement comes into place. But what that money is being used for is, at least the next generation will not be able to make a move without their every breath being watched, and that being used to control them. But here is what's also happening. Here's what's also happening. I was looking at, when I grew up, we learned about slavery here in the U.S., right? And we learned that the slaves weren't allowed to do a few things, but one of the things that they were definitely not allowed to do is they were not allowed to read. And I wanted to look into, why was that? Why is that the case, that they were not allowed to read? Well, what I was told is because if they learned to read, then they could possibly revolt and they wouldn't be slaves anymore. Check this out. I just went and Googled slaves not allowed to read. This is what I found on Wikipedia. Anti-literacy laws. In many slave states, before and during the American Civil War, anti-literacy laws. Okay, anti-literacy laws in many slave states before and during the American Civil War affected slaves. Freedmen, and in some cases, all people of color. Some laws arose from concerns that literate slaves could forge the documents required to escape to a free state. According to William M. Banks, many slaves who learned to write did indeed achieve freedom by this method. So look at that. Just that in itself, they could forge the documents. They realized, oh, wait, I could just write a piece of paper for myself to say I'm actually supposed to be free. And they got out that way. Wanted posters often mentioned whether the escapee could write. Anti-literacy laws also arose from fears of slave insurrection, particularly around the time of abolitionist David Walker's 1829 publication of Appeal to the Colorized Citizens of the World, which openly advocated rebellion, and Nat Turner's Rebellion of 1831. So I clicked on that because I wanted to learn more about that. I'll get to that in just a second. But the first anti-literacy law was passed by the legislature of the colony of South Carolina in 1740, enacted in response to the 1739 Stono Rebellion. It prohibited enslaved people from learning to write and restricted their ability to read to prevent an organized slave rebellion. Southern slave states enacted anti-literacy laws between 1740 and 1834, and the United States is the only country known to have had anti-literacy laws. Interesting. So if we go down here, we see between 1740 and 1834, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North and South Carolina, and Virginia all passed anti-literacy laws. South Carolina passed the first law which prohibited teaching slaves to read and write, punishable by a fine of, is that 100 pounds? Oh, I guess 100 pounds, yeah. And 6 months, because that would have been before the U.S. had its own currency. And 6 months in prison via an amendment to its 1740 Negro Act. And then some slave owners blamed abolitionists for the supposed need for anti-literacy laws. For example, in South Carolina, this guy, an ardent pro-slavery ideologue, wrote in a letter in 1845 to the British abolitionist Thomas Clarkson, "I can tell you it was the abolition agitation. If the slave is not allowed to read his Bible, the sin rests upon the abolitionists, for they stand prepared to furnish him with a key to it, which would make it not a book of hope and love and peace, but of despair, hatred, and blood, which would convert the reader not into a Christian, but a demon. Allow our slaves to read your writings, stimulating them to cut our throats. Can you believe us to be such unspeakable fools?" So he's got a point here. His point is, why would we allow them to read if you're writing to them saying, hey, you should rebel, don't be a slave? Why would we allow them to be able to read that? So the whole idea here is that they would punish you if you were a slave learning to read, or they would punish you if you were teaching slaves to read or write, because they didn't want their slaves to rebel against them. They didn't want their slaves to realize a way out of their slavery. And I looked at some other things here, and I wanted to look at this Nat Turner rebellion. I wanted to know, why did this rebellion cause them to say, hey, and there was another rebellion too, but this one was mentioned, and there was another one that was mentioned. But they said, after this rebellion, we need to enact some anti-literacy laws. We can't allow them to read. Why? Because Nat Turner, turns out, was a priest, and he was literate. And he organized this rebellion. And it says here, well, it says that he wanted to tear or spread terror, but there was something else where it said why they chose. I saw it earlier. Oh, okay. He was a preacher. There we go. Many black people who had not participated were also persecuted in the frenzy. Because Turner was educated and a preacher, Southern state legislatures passed new laws prohibiting the education of enslaved people and free blacks, restricting rights of assembly and other civil liberties for free blacks, and requiring white ministers to be present at all worship services. So look at that. Look at if you just look at the need to be present. Hey, you cannot congregate in private and read or assemble or any of that because or worship even without somebody being present there to monitor the situation, because we're afraid you're going to rebel against us. That's the same thing that's happening with all the flock cameras that are going up, all the need for AI data centers, all the basically spying through. Oh, it says I got disconnected. I wonder if it's still on and still going. We'll see. We'll find out. But all the spying through all the different mediums that they have. Let me see if this is still going strong here. Okay, yeah, we're still on. It looks like, anyway, at least to a certain degree. Okay, yeah, we're still on. Okay, looks like, anyway, at least to I can hear myself in here, so I'm going to close that off. Anyway, the point being made is look at the relationship between here. Okay, now we're going to make it so that they cannot read, and we have somebody watching at all times so that there is no private space where they could possibly form a rebellion or overthrow us or have a revolt or any of that, right? I wanted to go back here because it was saying here, as I was reading through this, that in fact, it wasn't just the slaves that were not allowed to read. In fact, even in the North, they made it difficult. They made it difficult for blacks and other colored people to learn to read or to go to school. And they basically just said, hey, listen, we don't want you to read. We don't want you in school. And there was only a few states, like in Massachusetts, where they allowed blacks to go to school with whites very early on. And everywhere else, they said, no, that we're not going to allow that. And they had to be forced to allow it after the Civil War. Now, here's what I find interesting. Here's what I'm trying to say. Is we might look at this and go, well, but there's no anti-literacy laws today. And you're right. You would be right. If you said that, you would be correct. There's no like overt law that, you know, if you teach somebody to read, if you teach someone of the lower class to read, then you're in trouble, they're in trouble. But what if that's because it's unspoken? What if that's because there's no need for a law per se, because you found another way to get people to not be able to read, to not be educated? And I'll show you exactly what I mean by this. Do you know, if we look at national literacy statistics, which I just pulled up here, do you know how much, or, you know, what it looks like, what literacy looks like in the U.S. on average? On average, it says that 79% of U.S. adults nationwide are literate, and this is from 2024. 21% of adults in the U.S. are illiterate. 54% of adults have a literacy below a 6th grade level. I don't know how we're considering that to be literate. It's almost like, well, if you can sound out the words on the page, that means you can read. But if you don't understand what you just sounded out, how much of that is reading? If this page were in Spanish, a really phonetic language. It's easy to sound out the words, right? But you don't understand Spanish. Okay, you can say all the words on the page, but can you actually read? No. So they're saying 54% of adults have a literacy below 6th grade level. Low levels of literacy cost the U.S. up to $2.2 trillion per year. 34% of adults lacking literacy proficiency were born outside the U.S. Okay. Massachusetts was the state with the highest rate of child literacy. New Mexico was the state with the lowest child literacy rate. New Hampshire was the state with the highest percentage of adults considered literate. And the state with the lowest adult literacy rate was California. Okay. And then it says the relationship between literacy and poverty. The nexus between poverty and literacy is pronounced, with these two challenges often interlinked. In impoverished regions, educational opportunities are frequently scarce, exacerbated by the necessity for struggling families to prioritize immediate income generation over sending their children to school. So basically, if you've got to survive, you can't really educate yourself. You don't have time to educate yourself. The majority of countries with the lowest literacy rates are concentrated in South Asia, West Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Regions also characterized by a prevalence of the world's poorest nations. I'm going to get to that in just a moment, but check this out. 54% of adults have a literacy below 6th grade level. What that means, that's over 130 million adults. Okay. And then here where it says Massachusetts was the state with the highest rate of child literacy, and New Mexico, the state with the lowest child literacy rate. Look at this. So you have Massachusetts up here. This was in 2015. Their average reading level in that state was 1 grade above average in 2015. Now, in 2025, they are just a little bit above average. Okay. We go down to New Mexico. They were already 1 grade below average in 2015. And now they're even worse. My goodness. Most of the states, actually almost every state, except for Hawaii, Mississippi, Louisiana, and DC, every other state, so that would be, let's see, 1, 2, 3 of 50. So 47 states are much worse than they were 10 years ago as far as child literacy rates or state level reading scores. Right? So that's terrible. Almost all of the states, in fact, it's only 2 states are above average. This is the average from 2015. Okay. Only 2 states are above that average. That should really clearly show that we are getting, as a nation, considerably less able to do things that we were able to do in the past. I pulled up an article last time that said Gen Z was the first generation to perform worse in their cognitive abilities than the previous generation before them. Right? This is showing, hey, it's really clear. It's not getting better. I should print this off. The reason why I'm showing this is because, if we look at, oh man, I had it here. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Here it is. If we look at what's called the Nation's Report Card, which, by the way, they randomly select hundreds of thousands of students across thousands of schools across the nation to find out, hey, can kids actually read? Can they actually comprehend? This dark line here, this dark line is supposed to be the what's considered your reading at grade level. Everything below this is you're not even at the grade level you're supposed to be at. So this is supposed to be for fourth grade. You're not even at so only 31% of these kids are at the grade level they're supposed to be at. Okay. For the vast majority of them, 69% are below that. This is just on average across the nation. I'm sharing this because if the vast majority of adults even, and especially our children, are below what we would consider the reading level they're supposed to be at, they're not really as literate as they think. And then if we've already been able to make literacy worse, if literacy's already become worse over the last 10 years, what's to prevent that from getting even worse? How are those kids who are growing up now supposed to support their children to be better than they were if the trend is getting worse? And if money is inextricably linked, as it was saying in this other article, right? The relationship between literacy and poverty is linked to such an extent that if you don't have an education, you can't be at the top. Let me tell you something. Education is wealth. Education is wealth. If you're wealthy, what do you do with your time? You become more educated. If you are educated, that is a result of wealth, because you know things that the previous generations didn't know. And then you're able to use that information to then better your own life and better the world. You should be able to better the world, right? But check this out. Okay, so I wanted to look at this in particular, which is how much money do you have to make in order to be in the top 1% of income in the world? Okay? To be in the top 1% of the world, what does your income have to be? If you have this income, you make more than 99% of people in the world. What is that? Don't know? Let me show you. To be in the top 1%, it says, do you make $34,000 a year? You're part of the 1%. Well, look at that. I'll begin this article with an uncomfortable truth. Middle-class Americans are extremely wealthy by international standards. For context, 99% of the world's population makes less than $34,000 per year. So if you earn more than that amount, you are by definition part of the global 1%. What number did you say? Did you say a number that was bigger? Did you say a million? Did you say 100,000? Guess what? It's only $34,000 a year, and you are part of the 1%. So if you're like Bernie Sanders, the 1%. I can't really do a good Bernie Sanders impression. But if you're Bernie Sanders, just raging against that top 1%, guess what? You're part of the 1%. If you make $34,000 a year, and what do we know? $34,000 a year is not that much, but 99% of people make less than that. So I wanted to look up something else, which this might blow your mind. How much to keep a prisoner in jail for a year? This says, on average, $40,000 to $60,000 per year. That's more than $34,000 a year. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, it reports an average cost of $36,300 per inmate annually. So in some states, like in Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, they spend around 23,000 to 30,000 per inmate per year. In other states, they spend 100,000 per inmate per year, like in California, New York, and Massachusetts. The median cost is about 65,000, but on average, if we average it all out, 36,300 per year. That's more than 99% of the world makes. Isn't that insane? Isn't that insane? Now, I have a bit of a crazy question for you. Okay. And I know this is a crazy question, but humor me for just a moment. If someone were to offer you $36,000, $34,000, let's just go with that number, $34,000, that you're in the top 1%, $34,000 a year to put your child in a jail cell for the next year, or for however many years you want to do it. $34,000 a year, you put them in a jail cell. They're not allowed to learn anything. They just sit there. They get fed, but that's it, basically. There's no learning allowed. But you get $34,000 a year. So the catch is, you get $34,000 a year, but the catch is you have to put your child in this jail cell, and they learn basically nothing. Okay? Would you take the money? I was talking with someone yesterday, and she said, well, of course not. And I'm glad she said that. But I asked why? Why not? And she said, because that would be inhumane. In fact, not just my child, anybody's child. That shouldn't happen. And I agree with that. But again, if we look at what's happening in schools, the vast majority aren't even able to read at the level that they're supposed to be reading at what's considered just, hey, this is the grade level, which should really tell us something. No, the chances of your child in the US going to school and actually learning what they're supposed to be learning is only 31%. Think of it this way. If you went to work and the chance of you getting a paycheck was only 31%, would you keep going to that job? Hell no. Hell no. I looked this up. This is interesting because I looked this up a month ago and I looked it up today, and the top answer, the AI overview, is completely different. I'll read you this one. This is the one from today. School isn't just about memorizing dates or solving random math problems. It's about learning how to learn. It prepares you for adulthood by building problem-solving skills, teaching you how to interact with others, and equipping you with the foundation needed to navigate the real world. Okay, I looked up the same exact thing a month ago. Literally, what is the purpose of school? And I'm going to read you because I took a screenshot of it because I knew this was not going to last, right? I took a screenshot of what it actually said 1 month ago. This is the AI overview. So, I was looking at the same thing. I literally typed in the exact same words. This is what it said. The purpose of school is multifaceted, aiming to educate, socialize, and prepare individuals for adulthood. That is the main difference here. This one says learning how to learn, right? Previously, it said aiming to prepare individuals for adulthood, right? Educate, socialize, and prepare individuals for adulthood. Key purposes include imparting knowledge and academic skills, fostering critical thinking and character development, providing socialization and cultural norms, ensuring democratic engagement, and preparing students for the workforce and economic independence. Preparing students for the workforce and economic independence. Okay. Now, this one says just learning how to learn. Prepares you for adulthood by building problem-solving skills, teaching you how to interact with others, and equipping you with the foundation needed to navigate the real world. I don't have a problem with this, actually. But does school actually prepare you to do any of those things? No. No. So, okay. So, again, going back to that question, would you take $34,000 per year, right? The catch is you have to put your child in a jail cell. And it could be a really nice looking jail cell, okay? You know, in Norway, they have beautiful looking jails. They're gorgeous, right? They've got like, you know, music studios in them and everything. But you have to put your child in a jail cell, and they're not allowed to learn anything. That's the catch. Would you take that deal or no? And the reason why I'm asking that is because people are putting their kids in school and they're not learning anything. They're not getting this. They're not being prepared to learn how to learn. They don't come out learning how to learn. In fact, they stop learning. And this is what I was saying before of, oh, what if they didn't have to make a law that said that you're not allowed to learn? They just put you through a system that made you not want to learn, didn't teach you anything, and provided a lot of entertainment so that you're distracted from learning. You have no desire to. You can entertain yourself with other things. You can be distracted constantly. So there's never any real learning going on, because that's what's happening. And why do a lot of people put their kids in school, in the public education system? Because it allows them to go to work. It allows them to go to work and not have to worry about where their kids are at. But are their kids actually learning? Would you still put your kids in school if you knew they weren't learning anything? If you knew that they're just sitting there being entertained, that it's just daycare for free, essentially? Would you still keep sending your kids there, knowing it would not prepare them for the future? That's the question, right? There was a couple of other things that I wanted to share here. And that was, well, let me just say this. The really interesting thing that I find, if you consider prison inmates, the vast majority of them are not rehabilitated. If you don't learn anything in prison, what ends up happening is when those prisoners get released, they go back out into the real world, and what do? They commit more crimes, because that's what they were good at. That's what they got good at. That's what they learned in prison. They got better connections to do more crime. So then they go out into the real world, they commit crime again, and they end up right back in prison. Can you see why I'm calling this like an open air psych ward? Because if you go to school and you don't learn anything and then you get released into the real world, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think they're going to do? What do you think our society is going to look like? And then these people are just raising more kids and getting the same result. And it's normalized. It's normalized where it's like, oh yeah, well, you know, they're doing it over there. No one can read. It's like, why are you coming at me? What's the big deal? What's the big deal? The big deal is that as this gets more and more normalized, as this happens more and more, the standard drops more and more and more. And so there's an unspoken kind of law. It's not a law, but it's an unspoken rule that we're not going to educate people actually, because then they're going to mess up this whole system that we've got going on. Number one, they don't believe that we can educate them. And so what do you think happens to somebody who's actually going out and educating people for real? Educating people for real. Do you think those who benefit from people being uneducated like that? Do you think let me give you an example. Oh, this is a great example. Let me see if actually I can look it up real quick. What is the guy's name? Ah, man. I think the company was called Atrazine. There it is. Okay. And let me see if I type in atrazine controversy. It doesn't even want to bring up this guy's name. And I know why. TED Talk. What was the guy's name? Let me just share my screen so you guys can see what I'm trying to figure out. Atrazine. Here it is. Endocrine disruption. There we go. Tyrone Hayes. That's his name. Okay. So check this out. I'm not going to play this whole thing. I don't even know how much I will play. So this is on the TED Talk website, right? And let's see if we can.
Story today. I want to start with this phrase. It's a Bantu proverb that I learned while working in Southern Africa.
I'm just going to pause it and just read you this. This guy was a scientist. He really liked frogs. That's how he described himself. A young boy who really liked frogs. And then he became an adult working at a university. He was given a grant or given some money to basically find out if this particular herbicide, atrazine, had any environmental effects or negative harmful chemicals or whatever to animals or any of that stuff. So he starts doing some research and using this chemical with his frogs. And he finds, oh, it's having some pretty clear effects on the frogs, where it is causing frogs to have, instead of just having one set of genitalia, having both male and female genitalia. And then he wanted to see, well, okay, well, that's a clear effect. Let me publish that. Let me tell the company, hey, this chemical is not safe. Here's what it's doing. It disrupts the hormones of these animals. And then he went on further to find, and when you do this with mammals, it has a similar effect, which means people that would be downstream of this chemical, like if you're spraying this on a large field and there's runoff into the river, and then that river feeds into people's drinking water, etc., that's going to have an effect. And that is literally the case of what happens. Well, guess what happened to this guy when he went to the company and said, hey, here's the results. They said, no, that's wrong. Here's more money to correct what you just said. We'll give you some more money to correct what you said, and make sure it says that this is safe. Okay, that's what you're supposed to say. And he said, but it's not safe. Let me do the research again. He does the research again, and he says, yeah, it's not safe. And they say, you know what? We're done dealing with you. You don't get it. So then he goes and tries to publish this on his own, and they discredit him. In fact, they create a whole division, a whole team of people that works at discrediting this man who was a scientist and doing well, working at a university, doing research. All, before this happened, he was well regarded. And then they went through lengths to try and make him seem like a crazy person and discredit him. What do you think happens when you try to educate the public? When you try to educate the public, and there are companies, people out there who benefit from the public being uneducated. This is just one example. I'll give you another example. You've heard of Nestle, right? Well, Nestle created, this is decades ago, they had baby formula that was no good here in the US. They brought it over to Africa. And they did an education campaign in the African countries that they were in, basically miseducating young women, mothers there, telling them that formula was actually better than their milk, their breast milk, and that they should mix this formula with the contaminated water that they had access to over there in these African countries that they were in. And that would be better than the breast milk that they could give their children. They did this whole campaign. This resulted in many babies dying. And if you were to speak up against Nestle, what do you think they would do? They were discrediting the people then that were exposing this whole scam that they were doing. At least attempting to discredit them. So I'm sharing that because we live in a world where it is very clear they are making the population less educated. Or let me say it in a less conspiratorial way. The population is becoming less educated, and there's no one at the reins to stop it or change it. Well, I'm here to tell you that to me, it doesn't make sense that I would continue on allowing that problem to grow, especially when I have children in this world. I'm not just going to lie down and take that. That doesn't make any sense. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that not just my children are educated, but everyone that I come into contact with, as much as possible, that I'm going to persuade them, hey, you really need to be educated. I need to be educated. Your children need to be educated. The next generation needs to be educated in a way that's actually effective, and that they actually can bring these points together and say, you know what, we should actually take care of each other. It's psycho to believe that you could just take all the resources for yourself and screw everybody else over. You don't think that's going to come back to bite you in the butt? You don't think that's going to have an effect in this world? You don't think that's going to have an effect on how people relate to one another? Doesn't that make it a more hostile environment for all of us? If even one person is out there just taking resources for themselves and forgetting everybody else, saying, forget you, that creates a terrible hostile environment, which then breeds more hostility between more people, where they're thinking, well, I got to do that for myself. And then it's a vicious cycle. So again, as I say in every stream like this, I am gathering all the people who can see, I don't want to be a psycho. This is a psycho world, and I don't want to be a part of the psycho-ness of it. In fact, I want to be a part of the cure to the psycho, right? There are billionaires out there who they have to do some really psycho, disgusting things in order to gain power, to climb up the ranks and maintain that power. And there are a lot of people out there who they've been so demoralized by the conditions that they've had to live in that they basically create a mental illness, that it creates a mental illness within them where they are willing to do whatever it takes and be as psycho as necessary in order to have the lifestyle that these billionaires have. And if we, as the general population, who are not psycho like that, would be willing to stand up to those psychos, which I know is kind of scary, and be willing to support those who are not getting support in this world and this reality, then we could stop the recreation of more psychos, and we could create a much better world for ourselves and for the next generations. And if you like how that sounds and you want to be a part of that, I meet with all the non-psychos that I can gather, right? We meet every Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, and we talk about topics just like this and what our part is in actually doing something about it. Not just talk, but actual real implementation. And you can see that implementation in our own children, just how stable they are, how they're not emotionally abused, how smart they are, how much smarter they are than the average kids out there. You can see that in our relationships. You can see that in how we're building trust with one another. We have a high trust community and much more. And how we're able to, I can still make money within this system if I improve my education. And not just that, but also I can do it in a way that is not morally objectionable, like how these billionaires are doing it. If you like the way that sounds, send me a message. And, I get, just do a little check, make sure you're not a full psycho. And if you are, and you're like, hey, listen, I recognize I may have some psycho sort of traits, because I'm saying, like, the idea of, like, I have to survive is actually ingrained in us as a psychotic trait, right? So you might have that, and that's okay. That's okay. But we're building to basically remove that from our society. Remove that as a genetic memory, necessity, because instead we'll create a society where everyone is cared for. And it might take a few generations, right? But we're creating a society where everyone is cared for, and it would be unthinkable to just say, screw everyone else, and I'm just going to hoard everything for myself. So if you like the way that sounds, you want your kids to be a part of that, to grow up in a world where we could actually live in harmony, send me a message. I'll make sure you're not a full psycho. And then we'll join in on what I'm calling the extraction team. Right now I'm calling it the extraction team, right? To get us out of the psych ward by supporting ourselves and everyone around us to not be psychos and actually be educated and actually care. All right. That's it for this episode. I'll see you guys all on the next one. Bye-bye.